Happy New Year, everybody. It's 2020, and it's another episode of the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. Happy to have you with us for the first official show of 2020. I am Anthony Cosenza. I hope that you had a great holiday season, Christmas, Hanukkah, Festivus, I guess. All of the holidays around this time of year, and is also a happy new year. Hopefully you all had a safe and fun new year. And I'm joined as usual by my co-host, John Sheeran. John, happy new year, buddy. New year, new team, maybe, I guess, in a way.
It's rare when I understand a reference that you said. It had a Merry Festivus to you too, or Happy Festivus or whatever
Hey.
Mr. Costanza calls it.
Yeah, exactly. Did you have a good New Year's?
I did. We went out into town and didn't remember much, so mission accomplished.
Yeah, that's usually in the mornings when you hurt. That's usually a sign of a previous good night. So
I invested in some Pedialyte to. I was well prepared. So
that stuff works, man. It takes a little bit, but it helps.
I get clowned for being a child, but I'm fine afterwards, and they're not. So
yeah, it helps. It helps, and it's not like it tastes terrible or anything. Anyway,
this one didn't taste that good, but whatever. We'll get another flavor next time.
Yeah, that's not what we shouldn't be promoting hangover cures on this podcast.
Hey, if Pedialyte comes calling, I'm glad to take their money.
Yeah, there you go. We can maybe hit them up for a sponsorship or something. We've got a lot to get to in this first episode of the year. We were feeling pretty good about, I guess as good as you could, about a team that was 2-14. Feeling good about some news that came out about the team, the win and all of that. And we're going to talk about some of that stuff. But unfortunately, we received news that former Cincinnati Bengals head coach Sam Wyche, big figure within the organization, on Thursday, January 2nd, passed away at the age of 74 years old. Very sad news, a bit unexpected, I think, to many. He had some major health issues, had a heart transplant a couple of years ago, but really sad news. And, not one, you start the new year off and it's like, wow, okay, David Stern passes away and then Sam Wyche passes away. It's like, wow, this is just kind of some big names here 2 days into the new year. John, I know you weren't, you were a twinkle in your father's eye, I guess, when Sam Wyche patrolled the sidelines for the Bengals. Your thoughts when the news hit, and I know you've seen videos and pictures and all kinds of stuff about Sam, but I think we'd be remiss if we didn't start off the show, kind of sharing some memories and thoughts about him on the day that he passed away.
Yeah, I remember hearing about his heart transplant and just his general health struggles of recent, and I wasn't 100% positive if he had dealt with cancer before, but just goes to show you that it's a cruel disease that can take literally any one of us, and unfortunately I remember looking up his record overall with the Bengals, and I was shocked to learn that he was actually under 500 for his career. And I was equally shocked that it just really didn't matter, I think, in terms of his legacy here, because he was the one coach that actually did something with this franchise. Even in the later years of the Paul Brown era, where he was still running the show, he was a meaningful presence to this organization. And I don't think there's really a bad memory any Bengals fan of the 80s really has of him, because in large part when he left, it's when everything started going downhill. Obviously, Paul Brown passed away, and then Mike Brown, I guess, let Wyche go. He went on to be the coach of the Buccaneers, and the 90s happened, whatever. But even in his 8 years here, where he was, I think, only had 64 total wins in 130 games, he still had 3 playoff wins. He still obviously led the best franchise record at the time in 1988 to that Super Bowl, a game that by and large they should have won. And not only that, but just like Paul Brown, such a tremendous innovator of the game, such a great building block of the NFL that we know today. People think the West Coast offense originated in San Francisco. It originated on the Ohio River, and that's how that Boomer Esiason's career really took off, and that's the development of Joe Montana. His legacy and his impact in the NFL is so vast, and even though he didn't have tremendous success as a head coach, just his overall impact on everyone, especially in the best times of Bengals football back in the 20th century, it's immeasurable, and it goes beyond just whatever record would say. And by and large, by all accounts, every interview that I've ever seen, he was just a very personable, very welcoming, hilarious man that was just a blast to be around. So, definitely rest in peace to him.
Yeah, we've got and for those of you joining us live, and for those who watch the video after the fact, whether it's on cincyjungle.com, YouTube, or even maybe the Facebook live video after the fact. But for those of you joining us live, they can see this as well. We've got a statement from Bengals president Mike Brown on the passing of Sam Wyche. Sam was a wonderful guy. We got to know him as both a player and a coach. As a coach, he had great success. And took us to the Super Bowl. He was friends with everyone here, both during his tenure as head coach and afterwards. We not only liked him, we admired him as a man. He had great generosity of spirit and lived his life trying to help others. We express our condolences to Jane and his children, Zach and Carrie. I don't want to be the guy that's, a little cynical, but I mean, the Wyche-Mike Brown relationship actually ended with a little bit of acrimony towards the end there. I think Sam Wyche years ago was kind of asked, why did you leave the Bengals, or how did that play out? He kind of said a little tongue in cheek, well, I was on my way to the office and I found out I was fired, or, and then Mike Brown kind of disputed that a little bit, but regardless, bygones be bygones. That was, a long time ago. And, Mike Brown and the Bengals organization obviously missing Sam Wyche. It's interesting you talk about Sam Wyche's, his success or, lack thereof in terms of overall records and all that kind of stuff. One thing that stood out to me is, as the Bengals head coach, I mean, that was one of the feathers in Marvin Lewis's cap, right? Is that he was the all-time winningest head coach. He had the most wins. He had the highest winning percentage, but he didn't have what Wyche had, which was a Super Bowl appearance, much less playoff wins. And oddly enough, when Sam Wyche was kind of had his back against the wall, so to speak, with the Cincinnati Bengals, that's when his teams ended up playing the best. In 1987, Cincinnati went 4-11, and there was talk of he's not making it through. He's not making it past that season, much less into 1988. Lo and behold, the Bengals go 12-4 and make it to the Super Bowl, nearly win that Super Bowl. Next year, following that, they go 8-8. I believe at the end of that season was the infamous "You Don't Live in Cleveland" game, and they finish 8-8. They miss the playoffs. Well, 1990, of course, they go 9-7, make the playoffs, get another win there, and then the infamous Bo Jackson game occurred there. So my thoughts about him were this, back against the wall, and when he needed his team to perform, he got him to perform. He won quite a few big games. He was a personality that was really unmatched, and especially in Bengals. I mean, when you look at the coaches after him, there was not one that really, wore his heart on the sleeve like that. And really, I mean, Marvin Lewis was a good man and a good football coach. Sometimes he got a little terse with the media and fans and all that kind of stuff. You look at Zach Taylor, he seems to kind of be the aw shucks, young go-getter type of guy. The guys before them, a lot of blah personalities, but Sam Wyche really brought the personality to the team. And like you said, he was very innovative, John. Very innovative in terms of the offense they ran. That offense that they ran in 1988 was just, the play action, the West Coast offense, just doing flea flickers and all kinds of stuff that was not part and parcel of the NFL really so much at the time, because it was kind of a running back heavy league, a running back centric league at the time. You had your Marinos and Jim Kellys and whatnot, but he kind of helped Boomer get to that echelon of quarterbacks in the league at the time.
I don't mean to put you on the spot here, but I just kind of want I want some type of answer to this question. Like, since Wyche had that personality and he had, relative success to the Bengals standards, and then he was fired by Mike Brown. Do you think that at the time it could be classified as a similar situation to when Jimmy Johnson was fired by Jerry Jones, and where like Mike's, fresh ego as the new owner of the team got the better of him and ended up making a wrong decision? Because obviously Johnson won Super Bowls with Dallas, and then Jerry, thought he could do it on his own, and then Wyche never won a Super Bowl there. But do you think those situations were kind of similar, or they could be classified in a similar category?
Yeah, I mean, similar. Obviously, Jimmy Johnson had the two Super Bowl victories, which was obviously making it a bit different. But yeah, I think there are a lot of similarities there, and it's odd. It's pretty apropos that you bring that up, because I was thinking about this today upon the news of his passing, and I thought about Mike Brown probably at the time when he took over. He probably got along with Wyche okay, but at the time it was kind of like, look, we're not getting to where we want to go. I've got a vision. I've got a plan. I want to do things my way, much like Jerry Jones. I want a new coach and I want a new quarterback. What he probably tried to do is sell the idea of a David Klingler or someone like that in the draft to Sam Wyche. Sam Wyche wasn't on board with that. He was comfortable with Boomer, even though Boomer showed a couple of signs of regression, in the 91 season, but played well in 90 to take him to the playoffs. And I think there was probably just a disagreement there. That's my take on it, that of the vision and where the team was going to be headed in terms of Sam Wyche and Boomer Esiason kind of being cycled out, much like Mike Brown saw towards the early 80s when Forrest Gregg and Ken Anderson were cycled out of the team, and they moved on to Wyche and Boomer. And that, at the time, moving on from Ken Anderson to Boomer, while Anderson had a lot of years of experience, that didn't sit too great with a lot of fans because of what Ken Anderson meant to the team. So, I think that was just kind of, like you said, maybe the owner trying to put the stamp on his stamp on things, getting out of his father's immense shadow, and it didn't work, and it hasn't worked since. So that's my 2 cents on it. I don't know if you have a take on that. I'd love to hear it.
I never really realized that until we were just like talking about it. But I always just hear like the two main decisions that were made or weren't made, I guess, whereas the casting off Bill Walsh to the West Coast, where he went on to create a dynasty in the 80s, and then the firing of Sam Wyche, that kicked off the 90s. So it just and those two, I guess, like were had influence and worked together in San Francisco. So it's always been interesting to me to see the decisions or the indecisions that stunted what could have been Cincinnati and ended up kickstarting in San Francisco, and how some things in the NFL are more similar than you might think.
Yeah, and I think Wyche unfortunately lives a little bit in the shadow. You kind of Freudian slipped Bill, like a Walsh name there, Bill Walsh. I mean, those two worked as assistants with the Bengals, and Walsh was kind of the next guy in line, as many hardcore Bengals infamously know. Walsh was the next guy in line. He didn't get the job. He moved on to San Francisco, and oddly enough, he and Sam Wyche end up meeting in the Super Bowl in the late '80s. But Wyche doesn't get the credit that Walsh does for creating the type of offense that were so innovative in the 80s and have evolved into what many incarnations of what we're seeing today. Play action based and no huddle and all that kind of stuff. Those are the things that Montana and Esiason, Walsh and Wyche ran a lot. And Wyche doesn't get the credit because he doesn't have the Super Bowl wins that Walsh did. But those are the kind of things those two were working on while they were with the Bengals. So the NFL lost an innovative mind, a great personality. I'll leave it with this. If you want to, I don't know where you can find it. Maybe on YouTube. It used to be on the NFL Network's top 10 countdown. So maybe it's somewhere in their archives or something. But if you go back, there is a top 10 count. I think it was top 10 rivalries or something. And it was one of them that was the old AFC Central and the coaches within it. It was Chuck Knowles, Sam Wyche, Jerry Glanville, and who am I forgetting? I think it was Marty Schottenheimer at the time, and maybe Bud Carson as well. But anyway, in the 80s, these guys, it was 4 coaches, huge personalities, real old school approach guys. And Jerry Glanville was just a wacky dude. And he and Sam Wyche would run scores up on each other, would do things that are just, you would not do today. Maybe if you're Bill Belichick, but that's about it. You would just not do these things today. And in post-game press conferences, they would like talk noise about each other openly. I mean, it was hysterical. So if you can find some of that stuff, if I find it too, I'll send a link out. But it was hysterical to watch. And I remember there was a game against the Houston Oilers. I think it was 1990, or maybe it was 1989 when the Bengals missed the playoffs. 10 seconds left, the Bengals are up 60-7 on the Oilers, and Sam Wyche opts to go for a field goal with 10 seconds left and makes it 63-7. And that's just the kind of guy he was on the football field. That's just the kind of guy he was on the football field. And I remember a bit of him. I was pretty young, but I remember a bit of him. I remember the Cleveland, you don't live in Cleveland game. So for a guy like me that didn't grow up in Cincinnati, he was a guy that really resonated with me. And it was a little shocking to hear him pass. I know he had some health problems, but a little shocking to hear him pass. And we didn't want to start off the show on a sad note, but we would be remiss if we didn't mention Sam Wyche, talk about his tenure with the Bengals, because he meant so much to this team. And, he was a guy, John, I thought, that did a great job of wrangling in huge personalities and harnessing that to get to some success. And, Marvin Lewis did it a little bit on some levels at times, but not to the same level that Sam Wyche did. So those are kind of some of the things I think about when I think about Sam Wyche. We're seeing a lot of, I see a lot of comments here about Wyche and the old AFC Central and all of that. So, RIP Sam. But we'll remember you fondly for sure. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. We're talking some Bengals news and notes. We're going to talk about the Bengals end of the season and what's ahead for them as the 2020 offseason is basically upon them, technically. And we'll talk about some season awards, some current coaching situations, strategies, some things they may look at going forward in this offseason. If you're new to this show, join us live every episode on CincyJungle.com, where we have the live YouTube stream as well as the Facebook stream on the Cincy Jungle Facebook page. And we welcome you to the live stream if that's how you're joining us. If you want to catch the show after the fact, or you're not able to catch the show live, get it on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, Megaphone, iHeartRadio. As I mentioned, it's on YouTube as well. So get the show how you can.
So, all right. Just like right as the Bengals announced Sam Wyche had passed away, the NFL announced that the Bengals coaching staff would be going down to Mobile to coach one of the Senior Bowl rosters. It would be them and the Detroit Lions, who are picking 3rd overall in the draft, that are going to take the 2 rosters. It's typically 2 of the worst teams that end up going down to Mobile. I've been to the Senior Bowl for the past 2 years. Last year they had John Gruden's Raiders down there leading the team. I think the year before that, or I think actually last year also, there was Kyle Shanahan's 49ers. Vance Joseph's Broncos were down there a couple years before. So when you're down there, you learn a lot about what the coaching staff is looking for, how they really structure the practice. And also, typically, more times than not, you'll see teams who coach the Senior Bowl invest a lot of their draft picks in Senior Bowl players. And it was interesting last year when the Bengals didn't really have a coaching staff at the time that the Senior Bowl was happening. They didn't really have any coaches there at all. I think they had their handful of scouts and maybe a couple of assistants who were on the way out of the coaching turnover in general. So it was really hard to gauge what the Bengals were planning to do at the time that the Senior Bowl was happening. It was also when Brian Callahan was announced by John Gruden, of all people, that he would be the offensive coordinator. So it's kind of interesting how last year the Bengals had like 3 coaches under contract in late January. And this year they have a full coaching staff, a full offseason to work with, and then they're coaching the Senior Bowl. And I guess the one big storyline right now, or like the kind of storyline that could be something revolves around Bill Callahan, because the Redskins hired Ron Rivera as their head coach to like a 5-year deal. He hired Jack Del Rio as the defensive coordinator, the guy that the Bengals were looking at hiring last year for the same position. But Bill Callahan was the interim head coach that Rivera is replacing, and he's now on the open market. And there were rumors last year that Zach Taylor, who was the unofficial announced head coach, that he wanted to hire Callahan as his offensive line coach. Callahan couldn't be bought out of Washington's contract, ends up hiring Jim Turner. So we're now a year into the Taylor-Turner relationship, head coach, offensive line coach, and it seems like for the most part this coaching staff is going to remain the same. But if there could be a couple of guys on the hot seat that could get replaced, Turner might be a guy, and if Callahan's available, he could be replacing him. So, Anthony, in terms of replacing Callahan for Turner, I think we would all agree upon that unanimously. But would you be interested, say that Callahan doesn't get a lot of interest from other teams, in bringing him on as a consultant, even though it would still be Turner with, has the mainstay of, what goes on in the offensive line room?
The latter is actually, I didn't know if you were going to present the latter option as a possibility, and I didn't really think about it as a possibility, kind of the consultant with Jim Turner still being the offensive line coach. I'd be on board with that more so than the former. I think the Bengals notoriously have, and Zach Taylor, to his credit, brought in more assistants and stuff like that this year. I think he beefed up the coaching staff more so than it had been in previous years. I think maybe by a couple of coaches, but still, more eyes, more hands in the pot oftentimes helps, especially a team in transition. You and I both have been pretty critical of Jim Turner, especially in the offseason when they hired him, when in the first part of the year when the Bengals offensive line was really struggling. But the second half of this year, really after the bye, when the Bengals altered their scheme, when they did some different things up front with blocking, they rotated guys to find the best players possible. The offensive line played a lot better the second half of the season. Bobby Hart played a lot better the second half of the season. Now, it's still maybe at an average-ish level, if not below average, but it's a lot better than what he was. He played better. You saw some things from Fred Johnson in the final game. He actually looks like he can play a little bit. Michael Jordan flashed as he got more snaps. And I love what Matt Minnick says on Twitter. These guys that are getting higher PFF grades, these rookies or guys that are, so many people are quick to lambaste those guys saying, they have low PFF scores, they're terrible players. Well, when they have limited amount of snaps and they don't get more snaps to not only get better, but make more positive plays. You understand what the concept there. So, I like what I've seen from the offensive line in terms of growth. I would like to see Jonah Williams out there under Jim Turner and get a chance for him to coach that first round pick. I would like to maybe see Jim Turner, Brian Callahan put the actual 5 guys that they definitely want, hopefully have them healthy out there. And then you've got that valued veteran coach voice in Callahan, guy who has been a head coach in the league, a guy who is coached at the college level as a head coach, a guy who is known for his offensive prowess. That's kind of what Zach Taylor, I think, wanted in some form last year, be it as a defensive coordinator or what have you. He wanted that guy to lean on. He's got his son on the staff. He's tight with – it just makes a lot of sense. I see the value in getting rid of Turner and just replacing him with Callahan. I do see the value in doing that, but, I think – you saw a unit take some strides towards the end of the year, and I'm a little more hesitant now to say, show them the door, and especially with the option you talked about with you have Callahan in as a consultant.
I think you do have to give credit where credit is due, and I don't know if it's not irresponsible, but I think it's more accurate to put that revival of the offensive line, or not a revival, but just the better utilization of their talents with what personnel they have to what scheme that they needed to run with Joe Mixon in the running game. I think that was also a collective unit with Callahan and also Taylor recognizing what strengths that they had and realizing that what they were doing was just not working at all. It was the worst running game in the league, and just the adaptation adaptation of more of a power and a man scheme to whatever talent they had on the offensive line, and the no hesitation moves to bench Billy Price, when he was doing bad, and to give Fred Johnson some tries out there, and to stick with Trey Hopkins at center, and to bring back John Miller at right guard, even when he wasn't fully healthy. So the personnel moves, I think, on the offensive line give Turner the benefit of the doubt. I don't know if I continue to trust him going forward, but this year has alleviated my concerns about his ability to develop talent. And yes, I do think that he shouldn't be outright fired, despite what our preconceived notions were about him. I still think that there are some questions about his character, but again, I don't know the man. I just go off of what I've read and what was previously reported over the past years or so. So yes, the benefit of the doubt can be slightly more given to. We can't forget about the whole Cordy Glenn situation. I still think that that's definitely a blemish that, if not anything else, is still cloudy over his overall character and whatnot. But also with Callahan, I think last year there was a lot of rumors or talk about how one of Taylor's first hires would be Mike Sherman. His father-in-law, who was a former head coach with the Packers. He worked under him in Texas A&M and then with the Miami Dolphins, hiring him as an offensive consultant or just an offensive assistant. So whatever Marvin Lewis is doing for Herm Edwards in Arizona State would be a very good apt comparison. A guy who doesn't have direct responsibility with any one unit, but a guy who understands whatever scheme and type of offense that they're trying to run, and to bounce off his veteran leadership. I think that's just a role that people pigeonholed Sherman for last year, but now I think Callahan would greatly fit that. But the problem is, like you said, this is the most deep, packed-filled, full Bengals coaching staff that we've seen in recent memory. I think it's the largest Bengals coaching staff ever. He literally Zach Taylor had new offices built for his new coaches this offseason. When I toured the facility in August, I saw new office spaces next to the indoor facility, next to the locker room, and I was told that they were freshly built for this new coaching staff. So it would have to take some type of turnover there in terms of coaches leaving for other jobs and opportunities, and we can get that in a minute. But it's also the fact that not only do you have Turner here, who has made a case to be brought back, but you also have an assistant offensive line coach as well, Ben Martin, I believe is his name, who's also deserves some credit for developing these young guys. So it would be a lot of voices in the room, mainly surrounding about one topic, but I do think that you have to value whatever veteran leadership, and also also the fact that Callahan was Taylor's college coach in Nebraska, that just a general experience with him, and then bringing him with his son, it just makes a lot of sense. But you're right, we can't just completely oust Turner, because we do have to give him credit for whatever developments that he's made with these young guys, and slightly turning around this offense line to somewhat of a respectable unit.
There's a lot of people that say they like what they saw. They talked about Joe Mixon getting another 1,100 yard season after a terrible start to the season. Now a lot of those yards, guys, were on Joe Mixon. I mean, he was he was really making some things happen. But towards the end, the scheme really opened up some things for the team. But the other side of this, John, and we'll get to the Senior Bowl aspect in a second, I think, but the back-to-back comments, one both in the YouTube chat and one in the live Facebook. Austin Tran says, do you think the coaching staff is changing or it's the same going forward in 2020? And then you've got Joseph Stopp in Facebook saying, bring Joe Brady with Burrow. Joe Brady is the passing game coordinator for LSU. And is kind of the hot name now, and it's kind of en vogue over the past couple of seasons for teams to go after these young guys in college to come up and just randomly, Cliff Kingsbury is one of them. So, I'm not saying Brady's going to come in and be a head coach, but, he could be looked at in some capacity, maybe a similar role with an NFL team, and, get a pay raise or what have you. But I mean, all in all, do you see, part of me says you're a 2-14 team. There is absolutely no way you shouldn't talk about potential changes. But part of me says this unit really never got a fair shake from the get-go. They got a late start. They had the injuries. So I'm kind of like, I don't know.
Right. And you even with the late start, which I do give them some type of benefit of the doubt with that, and some type of leeway in terms of, their overall offseason plan last year and how rushed it was. But even still, like it still took them a long time to hire a defensive coordinator. They went through a lot of names, a lot of guys who interviewed that eventually just never stuck, and they had to. I don't know if you want to call it settle on Lou Anarumo, but they did technically settle on a guy after however many interviews. So it's a matter of trust and them finding the right guy again, but also recognizing, just like Turner, that Anarumo did turn around his unit in certain respects and got the most out of some of those young guys too. It's just a matter of, I think, if there's going to be guys that are leaving, it's going to be guys that weren't hired last year. So you had, I think, 24 coaches were hired, and I think 24 coaches were on staff last year. 17 of them were hired in 2019. So you had 7 leftovers from the Marvin Lewis era, and the most notable ones were the special teams guys. Darren Simmons, the special teams coordinator, Braden Combs, his assistant at special teams. I think Tom Pelissero, I believe it was, who's really got the insight on anything Bengals information in terms of reports. He was talking about they're getting interest in other jobs as well. If anyone on the Bengals staff is going to get some type of promotion, it's probably going to be Simmons, because believe it or not, the Bengals did lead the league in something, and it was weighted DVOA for special teams according to Pro Football Outsiders. They were the best special teams unit in the NFL by far, and they did it without really like blocking a punt or a field goal or anything. It was just consistency on punt returns, kick returns, punt coverage, kick coverage. Yeah. Like to have career seasons from Brandon Wilson as a kick returner, to have Stanley Morgan as your best special teamer as a rookie, like phenomenal performances week in and week out, and why they remain competitive in most of these games. So I do like Simmons was, I think he was probably the most serious candidate to be the in-house replacement for Marvin Lewis last year, head coach. But unfortunately for him, there's just not a lot of head coaching openings this year for him to get that opportunity somewhere else. But for freshly hired head coach somewhere, or maybe for like Dallas, for example, who is maybe firing Jason Garrett, they had the worst special teams coach. He can get an opportunity there for a bigger organization. So I think those are the guys that were the notable guys that we could be looking at getting opportunities somewhere else. There's also Durante Jones and Robert Livingston, the cornerbacks and stages coach respectively, that were here during the later portions of the Marvin Lewis era that could also get opportunities elsewhere. Those contracts are expiring. So I think for the vast majority, if not all, the coaches that were hired last year are coming back for 2020, but there's always surprises if there's, some type of promotions to a big organization.
Yeah. I see a couple of people saying, fire Jim Turner, got to get rid of him. I see others kind of saying, Anarumo kind of in a similar boat. I mean, I think those two are the most at risk in terms of potential changes, but I think a lot of people want to see what this team does with a full off season, with some new high picks, with a hopefully healthier roster, and just kind of getting all the bad luck out last season and starting over fresh. And really now this coaching staff can hit the ground running from day one of the offseason instead of week 3 or 4 of the offseason as it was, and even longer because the staff wasn't even fully assembled until I think into February. So, I think a lot of people want to see that and have these guys get a fair shake now, especially since you saw marked improvement from most areas of the team. And John, you hinted at it. The part of the full off-season slate for the team and what's going to really be a major part of their off-season plan is now they've been designated to coach the Senior Bowl. The last, or at least one of the last times, I think there was one more. I think there was another time in 2009 when the Bengals did it, and then they did it.
2011 as well, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so it's 2009, 2011, and then they did it in 2003, and when Lewis's first year, and obviously we know what Lewis was able to do with that first draft class. I personally, John, I think this is huge. Someone, and kind of rightfully so, in the comments said, "Oh, that's where they fell in love with Drew Sample last year," and blah blah blah. Maybe, but limited scouting department. They rely on the coaches to do extensive scouting because of that. The last handful of times they have gone to the Senior Bowl, we mentioned the years. Look at the years; those are 3 of their better years in recent memory. and or led to multiple great years beyond that. So to me, this is a big plus.
Well, talking about great years, like 2003, 2011, they both took quarterbacks high.
Right.
And I don't think Palmer was at the Senior Bowl, even though he was the senior. But Dalton was at the Senior Bowl, and I don't know if he was Senior Bowl MVP, but he played pretty damn well in the game. The thing about what I don't think a lot of people realize, like you said, only 2 actual scouts in the scouting department, not a lot of assistants. The whole department is based around the coaches doing a lot of the work. And when asked about Joe Burrow in a tongue-in-cheek question at his end of the season press conference, he told them the truth. He hasn't seen Joe Burrow play at all because they have no time to watch college players during the season when they're game planning for the actual NFL. So if Joe Burrow, for example, gets invited to the Senior Bowl and then accepts the invite, that's going to be right after they watch the initial film. Like a lot of their initial impressions on Burrow or Herbert or Jordan Love or any of these other quarterbacks that they can consider in this game or in the Senior Bowl, it's going to be right after they've initially watched the first film on it. And obviously they have area scouts that have obviously got some opinions on Burrow, and they sent Duke Tobin to watch Burrow and Justin Herbert during the season. So there's going to be some type of initial opinions on there. But like you said, for the coaching staff, the guys who are going to be down there, the guys that have such influence on drafting this draft class, a lot of their first impressions are going to be down there in the Senior Bowl. And like you said, Drew Sample is a Senior Bowl player. Jermaine Pratt was a Senior Bowl player. Renell Wren, and I believe there's one more from this past draft class. But like they had virtually zero presence at the Senior Bowl, but they still drafted a lot of those guys and still value the work and the performance that they put on down there. So to have them down there to evaluate what looks to be very promising Senior Bowl rosters, I would agree. It's definitely huge, and it's definitely going to be important in their process because with how they structure their overall war room and their whole drafting committee, it's going to be fresh opinions based off of the initial film that they watched.
Yeah, and I think a lot of because of the smaller scouting department and the coaches being so heavily involved in the scouting process, I think the hands-on, the pre-draft interviews are huge for the Bengals. That's why they liked Ryan Finley, because that was really the only guy that they really liked and wanted to meet with in last year's draft. They like the pre-draft interviews to get to know these kids, and that's why coaching in the Senior Bowl for them is so huge. Even though it's only a handful of days where they're coaching them up and all that, they get a vibe from certain players as to how they respond to their coaching, how they respond in terms of learning what they're teaching them, all of that kind of stuff. And it's not like kind of the formal interview type of process that happens at the combine or the pre-draft interviews, but it's on the field. It's for a handful of days. And I think that means a lot to the Cincinnati Bengals and their staff in terms of who they're going to select. I would be very surprised if Joe Burrow plays in that game.
Yeah.
And, I think as we sit here today, I think it's him. It's got to be him as the pick. Especially after 8 touchdowns. Good Lord. But I think I think this nomination, it really helps a team that has the smaller front office system. It really helps them and what they're trying to do, how they're trying to build their team. And a lot of times they'll find a diamond in the rough here. So I think it's a pretty big deal. Absolutely.
And I just remember, like, you could, like you said, you could definitely tell that some players just resonate with the coaching staffs more. And I think it was last year with the Raiders that John Gruden fell in love with, I think the safety that they drafted in the first round out of Mississippi State. And you could just, like, the practices are more important than the games. Just the interaction between the players and the coaching staff with what they want them to do in the individual drills. They'll take players to the side and have them do some extra work. They'll stay after practice. And you can tell, like, which players are more popular with getting one-on-one treatment with certain scouts and coaches after practice. So you just learn so much, and the fact that the Bengals are going to have their full force there, we're going to know a lot more about who they like and what their process is looking this year than we have in years past. So I'm definitely all for it. I applied for my credentials about a week ago, and I'm still waiting to hear back. But if I'm going down there, we're definitely getting the full coverage for the show.
Nice.
Absolutely.
You did that last year too, right? You were down there with
Last 2 years, it's a fantastic experience.
yeah.
I definitely recommend for anyone.
You were hanging with big time Joe Goodberry last year, if I remember right. He was
Yeah.
or was that the year before?
World's worst hotel roommate. Let me tell you.
Oh boy, horror stories galore. I'm sure. Just kidding, Joe. We love you. But it's a big thing for the Bengals, and it's I saw one of our was it Joseph Stop again saying Thaddeus Moss third round. I mean, these are the types of games where you can say, if Burrow is our guy, does it make sense to add a piece that he is very familiar with? If you remember when the Colts drafted Andrew Luck at the very top of round 2, I believe it was, the Colts drafted Coby Fleener, his tight end that he loved at Stanford, and Fleener had a decent career with the Colts, and it was obviously something that was a strategy by Indianapolis to help their quarterback out as much as possible. And I think that could be a strategy the Bengals use and will potentially look at employing by being coaches of the Senior Bowl and looking at some of these players that Burrow has played with and seeing if they make a fit. So good stuff for the Bengals ahead. And it's an exciting thing. And we'll talk about optimism and whatnot going forward here in just a second. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. We've talked about the Bengals coaching staff. We've talked a little Sam Wyche. We've talked about a number of things on this episode. We're going to be here for a little while longer. We will be having a listener questions episode tomorrow afternoon. So join us for that. It'll probably be midday Pacific, so 3-ish Eastern. So join us for that. We're already fielding questions. We've got a lot of texts lined up. And then we've got, I think, some emails and other stuff. So tweet us, do all that stuff, tee us up. We're still taking questions. There'll also be a post on cincyjungle.com to leave some questions in the comments section there. So let us know what you're thinking about as we head into the weekend, the first weekend of the offseason for the Bengals. And we'll try and answer as many as we can tomorrow, which is Friday the 3rd. So try and join us with that for that as well. Again, you can get this show wherever you get your audio podcasts. We're on YouTube and Cincy Jungle, so check us out and try and join us live if you're able. John, I think kind of the last area we're gonna touch on here is just overall optimism. We've kind of built a little bit to this point here. We'll try and get to some season awards at the end too, but I think kind of where we're going here is, how optimistic should we be for a team that's 2-14? And we talked about the Senior Bowl now on the horizon for them, and then they're being the coaching staff there, or one of the coaching staffs there. The Bengals just came off a win against a Browns team, really a game that you kind of felt they needed to win that game for a lot of reasons, not just pride, but to kind of feel good about next year, maybe even security for Zach Taylor. Probably not, but maybe a little bit there. That's a rivalry game. You don't want to lose that at home. Maybe a good swan song for Andy Dalton. Now the team is poised to have the number 1 overall pick, top picks in every round. Guys are getting healthy. You got basically an extra first-round pick if you want to look at it that way, and Jonah Williams coming back. I mean, cap space, a lot of different reasons here for optimism. I already saw a comment in our live chats here. It's the Mike Brown Bengals. There's no reason for optimism. Okay. But I don't know. Where are you at optimism wise as the year now, the off season's here, and there are a lot of kind of chips stacked in the Bengals corner kind of quietly.
That's the whole reason for any warranted optimism, because the pessimism is 100% understandable, and it's basically this relationship that Bengals fans have with the organization is very parasitic, and it's understandable why you wouldn't have any expectations for them to do the right thing. And I think in years past, when they weren't as good, when they were finishing like 3rd in the AFC North, around 6 to 7 wins, they should have been pushed to a place where they could have to be forced to improve, but they didn't take the necessary steps, and they ended up regressing to the worst team in the league. the reason why there's some room for optimism is because, like you said, they are in the absolute perfect spot. They are in with the first overall pick, with a quarterback who's worth being taken there, with a coaching staff that, again, has now time to build something, to overhaul this roster. Right now, they have about $16 million in cap space, but they can get the quarterback off the books for $17 million. They can get the left tackle Cordy Glenn off the books for $9 million. They can get a cornerback off the books, Drake Kirkpatrick, for about $8 million. They're setting themselves up for over $80 million in cap space, and we know that they're not going to use all $80 million. They're probably not going to use $60 million of that, but it's still a lot to do a lot more than what they've done in recent past. And the fact that they've watched most of their free agency be a colossal failure in an offseason period where they did make some moves, but it just wasn't very smart moves. The fact that they now have that in the back of their minds with a lot more cap space, it sets them up to do a lot of great things for once, instead of a lot of decent things. And it's a step for them to take more baby steps into the right direction. But again, it's the fact that we have to wait to see them actually do it. It's the careful optimism, knowing that they're in such a great position, better than most teams who are not in the playoffs right now, to the ability to take this franchise to the next step. They still just have to do it, though. And I understand why anybody would be very skeptical in believing that will actually be happening. But they're also in a position where they don't really have any other choice. Like, it's not like they can go in another direction in the draft. It's not like they can't use at least $40 million of that cap space to improve the roster. It's not like they're not going to get rid of Andy Dalton or Cordy Glenn to extend some other players or sign maybe a starter or two in free agency. Like, these things are almost inevitable with their situation now, but it's still just the big question mark of, will they actually do it? And you can be optimistic because they're just in no position to do anything different. I think that's where this all stems from.
Yeah, and I'm sharing a screen here. You see the top. This is courtesy of Spotrac.com. Obviously the financial-based site for basically all professional sports. But so this is a little bit of a fluid number, but you're basically seeing the top half of the league in terms of cap space. And Cincinnati currently is at number 13 projected for 2020 with about $58.5 million in projected cap space. That's without a Drake Kirkpatrick contract potentially coming off of the books. You mentioned Cordy Glenn I'd like to see him come in and play well next year, but they kind of benched him a little bit in the last game for Fred Johnson. And so who knows what his future holds. You've got Andy Dalton's $16-17 million potentially coming off the books. So I guess, if you're adding right there, that's, roughly, gosh, I don't know. I'd have to go off the top of my head. I think Dre's cap number is about 10 million. Dalton's is about 17. And then Cordy's is, I think, another 8 to 10 million. So, you're looking at about 35 million or so potentially in additions, right?
I think with the dead money, it's closer to in the low 20s, or sorry, the mid 20s.
Yeah.
But still, it's still substantial. It's not marginal by any means. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Cause I didn't add in the dead cap for Kirkpatrick and Cordy Glenn, but you're thinking you're looking at mid 20s or so in terms of additional space for that. So I guess where I'm going with this, John, is I'm pretty sure I know the answer, but what do you like the best in terms of reasons for it to be optimistic next year? The late season uptick in performance from the offensive line and the defense, and them getting wins and just playing better throughout most of the second half of the season. The high picks, the Senior Bowl coaching opportunity, or the potential and immense amount of cap space that the team will have at their disposal.
So I've seen a lot of dead cat bounces with this team. That was all obviously with Marvin, but for them to finish the season on a relative high note, it's not anything particularly new. And I understand that it's more than just winning the last game. It's about showing actual improvement in both sides of the ball, specifically with the defense and getting out from under the cellar, and some of those players actually playing well. I think the reason for optimism there is that you're going to have most of this coaching staff back, and it's not like because last season when they went from Terrell Austin to Marvin Lewis, there was an improvement, but then all of that kind of went away when Marvin Lewis was fired. So the fact that you have Anarumo coming back, you would like to see some of that progress from the defense show up this year. But I still think that even with that aside, I still think it's just they're in a position to draft a franchise quarterback, and they're in a position to actually use some cap space and be almost forced to use some of this cap space because they have to have some type of minimum spending requirement with the cap going near 200 million for the 2020 season. So I still think it's just the situation that they brought in, and I understand that momentum to a certain extent can be believed to be real, but it's just that I've seen them win the final 2 or whatever games for other seasons, and like that 2017 season, they won the last 2 games. They knocked Baltimore out of the playoffs. It was the resurgence of Tyler Boyd's career. They still finished 6-10 the next year. It didn't do a ton. I think you still have to harvest or harness that late season momentum, put it into actual improvements. So that doesn't really do much for me, but I do like the fact that they're going to turn over this roster to the best of their ability, and for the most part, it's going to be a lot of those depth players that are left over from the previous regime, and potentially get maybe a draft pick or 2 in the form of some trades to really help rebuild this roster. I think we're going to see a much different overall roster in terms of just from the bottom up, maybe not in terms of most of the starting lineup, but most of the rotational and depth guys. There's going to be a lot of turnover there. And again, you're going to have the most important piece of your team being brought in with the first overall pick. And if there's anything that can instill some type of optimism, I think it has to be starting there.
Yeah, and I predictably, that's where I thought you would go, and that's probably where I'm going to go as well as the draft. And that you can lump in the Senior Bowl with the high picks in that process. That's what their bread and butter is, and they sucked enough to get those high picks. And I guess you could say they deserve those high picks because they did not play well, particularly through the first part of the season. But it was a hard season to bear through, and I think a lot of people would call it a trademark Mike Brown type of Bengals season, but I think the draft with the first overall pick, and then you've got the high picks in the other rounds. I think that sets you up real nicely. Then you can supplement that with the space. I don't think there's going to be the spending spree that we saw in Cleveland, and if we know anything about the Cincinnati Bengals, that's just not going to happen. But I think there could be some interesting player trades that could either net them more picks or player-for-player trades, something like that. So that could take up some of the cap space. You could see more free agents coming to Cincinnati in terms of outside guys, not the absolute A+ tier guys, but maybe more C and B tier guys. Maybe more guys that are going to be solid starters, the John Millers and above, more of those guys as opposed to your BW Webbs and guys that are Kerry Wynn and guys like that sign for near the vet minimum. You get guys that, you can bring back. You also have to consider that, John, you talked about the roster may showing a lot of turnover. That's true. There could be, but I think Darqueze Dennard played pretty well this year. That's a guy you may want to think about bringing back, especially if you're thinking about shipping away Dre Kirkpatrick, even though Dre's more of a boundary guy. Darqueze is more of a slot guy. You've got the decision on AJ Green to make. You've got a decision to make on Tyler Eifert, who said, he set a career high in playing games. He played all 16 games and, started to come alive towards the end of the year, much like the rest of the team. So, there could be some mainstay. You've got a decision on Joe Mixon. You've got a decision on John Ross. You got to figure these things out. So if they want to re-sign a lot of those guys, that's going to play into that cap space decision. But, I think hopefully they'll make a little bit of moves from the outside in terms of free agency with that cap space. And then to me, it's about the draft. It really is about the draft this year and what the Bengals are able to do. So that's
if nothing else, like I said, it's the perfect opportunity for them to do something. And if they don't at least partially take advantage of it, we can just forget about them doing anything else. You know what I mean? It's like this is like a litmus test for their overall competency. Like they're in the perfect situation to actually do something to improve in the offseason. And if they don't even do that in the slightest sense, then we can forget about them doing anything in the future, I guess.
Yep, and I think we've talked about it on a couple of the past episodes, as well as seeing some comments tonight. This team set a record in terms of lowest attendance. The people were not going to the games. They were the lowest at Paul Brown Stadium this entire year. I think management and ownership sees that. I think they understand that, and I don't think that Joe Burrow he'll move the needle, but he's not going to move it to capacity crowds right away. Right. I think they need to do more than that. And these Bengals fans, as we know, they're not dumb. We interact with them every week. They know their football. They know their team. If this team isn't showing them more in terms of a desire to win, I think that they're going to see that. So, but like I said, big win, I guess, if you want to call it a big win against the Browns, a good way to end the year. So you're feeling pretty good about the last half of the season. You've got your high picks. You've got the opportunity to coach in the Senior Bowl, and you've got a plethora of cap space. To me, it's just setting up for a potentially exciting offseason. Even if you want to put the Bengals asterisk next to that statement, I don't know. I think it's setting up to be pretty exciting. Do we have time to do awards, John?
I'm good if you are.
All right, let's do it. Or do we want to split them up?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay.
I love taking half of work.
Okay. Okay. Let's go with, we'll go MVP, offensive MVP, special teams MVP, and defensive MVP. Let's do all the MVPs. And then maybe coach of the year. How about that?
Perfect.
And then we can do like other smaller ones like offensive lineman of the year and all that.
Breakout guy, rookie, whatever.
Yeah. We'll do those. We'll do those on the next episode. See, we're planning on the fly. I love it. That's
what we do best.
I know that's what happens when you got two busy guys here. All right. So defensive MVP, who you got?
Oh, it has to be Dunlap. Like, I think in the beginning portion, I was still rating Geno Atkins really high, and this is when Dunlap wasn't performing at his best either. But when the defense turned around, it was mainly because of Dunlap, and the fact that he got to 10 sacks, he got to a top 5 or 10 PFF overall grade as an edge rusher. The fact that he deservedly should be in the Pro Bowl and should be almost an All-Pro at this point. His late season resurgence has been remarkable, and he's played arguably the best he's had all year. And it was just such a joy to watch all those pressures accumulate to actual tangible quarterback hits and sacks. So it was amazing to watch him play this year. He's by far defensive MVP.
Yeah, I mean, Geno got the Pro Bowl nod, but unfortunately, Dunlap hit his stride real later, kind of midway on. And, some of the Pro Bowl voting and all that kind of stuff takes place a little earlier than that. And Dunlap's kind of been a streaky guy in his career. He's been a real streaky guy, and somehow he always sniffs that 8 to 11 sack range. He bats down a ton of passes. He's pretty dang good against the run. I mean, he can play the run because of his length. And, he, like you said, he's just a good all-around player. I keep waiting for when the beginning of this year hit and he just wasn't getting the sacks, he wasn't having the impacts. I'm like, oh, great. There's father time. And I keep waiting for it. And same thing with Geno. I keep waiting for father time to catch up with those guys. And they just keep performing. They keep playing. It will hit, and it'll probably hit in the near future, but I've learned just to not count them out. I can't count either of those guys out. I give it to Dunlap, even though Geno got the Pro Bowl nod. Dunlap towards the end of the year was just ridiculous in the backfield all the time. And so I got to go with you on defensive MVP with Carlos Dunlap. What do you got for I think I know where you're going to go with this. What do you got for offensive MVP?
I feel like Joe is the right answer here, and it feels like there's arguments to be made for others. I think Tyler Boyd deserves an argument. He also hit 1,000 yards this year. There's an argument to be made for Trey Hopkins, the more unheralded guy on offensive line. But I just I have to give credit to Joe Mixon for what he improved upon. And he's been a good running back for his first 2 years and behind shoddy offensive line play, but his real progression this year was in the form of making guys miss and avoiding tackles. And I think he finished officially fifth in terms of avoided tackles from Pro Football Focus. So I think 52. It was a mark that I think he's had more broken tackles this year than his first 2 years combined. And it wasn't just the adaptation from the offense line and the scheme to get him going. It was him progressing into a more effective runner and him progressing into a more valuable runner. And like you said, it wasn't all the offensive line that helped him because most of his yards came on his own. And that was because for the first time in his career, he was being a more elusive runner. He was getting more yards after contact. And, he's always been the guy to put his shoulder down and to, run over guys. And we saw that in his very last carry against the Browns. But the fact that he was breaking so many tackles and becoming so much more valuable of a runner, it made a difference in the run game for the first time in his whole career. I think this was his most impressive season, accounting for all the factors. The fact that the running game was so crappy to begin with, and the fact that he finished with almost as many rushing yards last season as he did this year. I think he finished like 31 short of his mark last year, and he only had 320 in the first 8 weeks. So, I'm hesitant to give it to running back because their inherent value isn't as high, but he was basically the entire offense, and his progression should deserve a lot of recognition for that.
I was tempted to get cute in terms of offensive MVP and team MVP, and I think a case can definitely be made for Tyler Boyd here. But you look at Joe Mixon here. I mean, second highest career total in receptions. Granted, we're only talking about 3 years, but tied his rookie year total for receiving yards, career high in receiving touchdowns, second highest total in rushing touchdowns, second highest total rushing yardage, second highest yards per attempt. I mean, played all 16 games. You could tell he got a little chippy at certain points of the season, but I mean, kept a good attitude throughout and just produced oftentimes when the offensive line wasn't really helping him out. And I'm looking more back to like the Rams game. I'm looking to the first Baltimore game. And then, towards the end of the season, I think things started to open up. The 2 Cleveland games, the New England game. I mean, there was some good blocking there towards the end. But, there are times where there was nothing. There was nothing there, and he made it happen. So I'll say offensive MVP, Joe Mixon as well. Your thoughts on special teams MVP?
It's Stanley Morgan. And I don't really care about Pro Bowl voting this much, but it's very lazy to put Clayton Fejedelem as the Pro Bowl candidate for the Bengals and not giving Stanley Morgan the credit. I was more of a fan of Morgan coming out than of Damian Willis, and I know that Willis got hot in training camp in the preseason, but I was still holding on to Morgan to produce as a receiver and his potential as a receiver, and he ultimately made the practice squad and got elevated primarily because I think of his work on special teams. I think he established a good relationship with special teams coordinator Darren Simmons, and he definitely earned the trust. And over the later course of the season, he was by far their best special team. And this is when Brandon Wilson was leading the NFL in kick return average, like specifically on punt coverages. Like he just could not be blocked, and he would make about a tackle a game. He would make he would stop a keeper punt inside the 10-yard line. He would just be in the right positions at the right time. And every single week when I did the rookie report, there would be some type of play that would make Morgan stand out. I think he ended up with a special teams grade of about 90 from Pro Football Focus, which is top 10 in the league in general. So for an undrafted rookie, you start on the practice squad to be your most valuable special teams, that deserves all the credit in the world for sure.
Agreed. Stanley Morgan, and he was exceptional on punt coverage and whatnot. Always seemed to be down there making plays. Special teams was a hard one here because I think that there were a number of worthy candidates, your nominee included. Even Randy Bullock surprised me at times this year. He had one of his best seasons, hit a 57-yarder career high. In that Cleveland game, that second one, I think it was 47 yards. It was rainy. It was gross out. And the Bengals needed it, and I'm like, watch, they're going to let this thing slip away. He's going to miss this thing, and Cleveland, lo and behold, it's just boom, automatic. He hit it. But I'm not going with him. I'm going with Kevin Huber. I thought Kevin Huber had one of, if not his best season with the Bengals. He was, I believe, 7th in the league in terms of punts inside the opponent's 20. He was consistently had a high average. I think there was a punt return touchdown given up by the Bengals special teams unit, if I remember correctly, but I could be wrong about that. I'll have to look that up. But, he seemed to be very consistent. I can remember really count on one hand and have fingers left over amount of shanked punts this year by him. And for a team that was not moving the ball on offense, was struggling on defense early on, he was a guy that was pinning teams deep. And even at times when the ball wasn't down at the 5 or 2 by Morgan, it was inside the 20. It was maybe at like the 16, and it was just a sky high punt that just limited any kind of return yardage ability. And I think that once the Bengals and the coaching staff started to get their feet under them at the second half of the season in terms of experience and what they're trying to achieve and all of that, I think he became an even more important weapon in terms of using the field position. I just thought it was a very good year from him. And, you don't like to talk about punters that often, but I think some credit is due there. I thought he played very well for the special teams unit.
Yeah, and you can't have the best special teams unit without having a tremendous performance from your punter. And it's like it's similar to offensive line play. If you have a bad punter, you notice him. If you have a bad offensive line or a bad offensive lineman, you typically notice him more than not. With Huber, it was just like, he's going to punt it 45 or 55 yards. It's going to be going out of bounds inside the 10-yard line. It's just consistent. It's just night and day. So that, he's probably earned this award if we were to give it out every year for the past 10 years, at least, the vast majority of the time. So this year was really no different for him.
Yeah. Where do you want to go? What do you want to end it for tonight in terms of the award? Do you want to go coach, or do you want to, we're getting some other suggestions in the live chat, but, if you've got one you want to.
Yeah, let's go coach, I guess.
Okay, go for it.
So I just want to go Simmons I just think for just dealing with being the head guy, the highest standing coach remaining from Marvin Lewis, to work with brand new coordinators, to work with brand new assistants, and to work with one of the youngest rosters in the team. Most of those young guys, their only opportunity of playing is going to be on special teams. And, to go from potentially being the head coach, taking over from Marvin, to just being the same special teams coordinator for the past 20 years now with a new head coach, and to have, again, the best unit in the NFL in terms of weighted DVOA, to have really no shortcomings in any type of coverage or return unit, to have Brandon Wilson have his best year, to have Stanley Morgan be your best special teamers, to have Kevin Huber, improve the way he did, and like you said, to have Randy Bullock play better than I guess was expected for him. I just think with all those circumstances, he did by far the best job. And if there's anybody on the staff that is worthy of some type of promotion or some type of raise throughout the league, it's probably Darren Simmons.
Yeah, hard to disagree with you there. I think some cases could be made for some other coaches. I kind of thought maybe the defensive line coach, but the Bengals were still 26th in terms of sacks, and they were one of the worst at stopping the run and stuff. So I guess I was more romanticizing the past few weeks where the pass rush came alive quite a bit. But it's hard. Like I said, Bullock played well this year, kicked pretty well. Huber punted well. You talked about Stanley Morgan. The returners, they basically had two guys that could have been Pro Bowl candidates if they were healthy for the entire season in terms of kickoff returners. I was not overly enamored with Alex Erickson as a returner this year. He didn't really pop the big plays. But, if that's your biggest issue, a rotational punt return guy that was really forced into more action because of injuries to these other guys, then, you're kind of grasping at straws, I think. So I will say yes, Darren Simmons, Coach of the Year for the Cincinnati Bengals. We've got others to get to. We'll do them on subsequent shows. We've got like Play of the Year. We'll do Game of the Year. We'll do what offensive lineman or lineman of the year, I guess. We'll do all kinds of stuff. We'll get fun. We'll get crazy with this, but we wanted to start it off and talk about some season awards, at least some of the biggies, get those out of the way, and we'll move on from there. We'll also be doing our 2020 prospect watch coming up on the next show. We've got some people in mind. We took the week off this week, but hopefully you saw them on Cincy Jungle. Joe Burrow, that prospect watch post went up, as well as Justin Herbert. I don't think the Tua one went up yet, but that should be coming up. So check those out. We'll be getting you more of those. We've got more coming down the pipe. The other thing I wanted to just bring up, and I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver, but we'll be probably doing some pretty special things in terms of guests and stuff in future shows. As you may have noticed, when we do the prospect watch, we've brought in some others from SB Nation networks and whatnot to help us preview those. We had Mike Holbrook, a listener in the live Facebook chat. He offered to connect us with former Bengals linebacker Reggie Williams. And apparently during this show, Reggie Williams said he would love to come on the show. So we're going to coordinate that and bring him on. Interesting time to talk to him, given Sam Wyche's passing. He, obviously played under Wyche. So we'll be hopefully coordinating that pretty soon. I've been in talks with getting a particular Bengals player who was on a recent NFL 100 list to come back on the show. So
wonder who that is.
Probably their only guy who will be on that list. So we've got some of those people hopefully coming down the pike, along with others. This time last year around Super Bowl, we were approached to bring on guys like Tyler Boyd and others on the program. So hopefully we'll get those opportunities as well. And like John said, he will most likely be at the Senior Bowl, getting us some coverage there. Nudge, nudge, John. So we're excited to bring you some interesting stuff, and not just from this show. Hopefully you've been enjoying Chalk Talk from Matt Minnick. Hopefully you've been enjoying Orange is the New Black, the podcast from Zim Hude and Ace Boogie. We've been bringing you a lot of different stuff. That is on our audio channel, not necessarily on our YouTube channel, but check out all that stuff. They've been bringing you some great content too. We're excited to bring you some new stuff, and just wanted to throw that out there as we close the show, John.
It's the end of it's been the end of the year, it's the end of the season. We made it. It was only 2 wins, but we're here now. And like the whole theme of this show has been, we're looking at brighter futures. We're looking at greener pastures. This is what it's all about.
Yeah, nowhere really to go but up. It'd be very, very hard to believe that this team will be as bad or worse than they ended up being this year. For a variety of factors, and we discussed a lot of those factors, but just general luck and health and, the coaching staff being around throughout the month of January. So, you would think that will help them immensely going forward. So thanks everybody for tuning in. If you joined us live, thanks for tuning in after the fact. Appreciate your input as always, John, and join us for listener questions on Friday afternoon. Otherwise, we'll see you next week for our weekly show. Thanks, everybody.